So I think we can begin, right, Noah?
Okay.
No, right on. Okay. So, good evening. I welcome you all to the last event of our poetry festival. My name is Gilad Meiri, and I'm the artist director of the Poetry Place International Zoom Festival with the poetess Noah Shakarji. And now you can say hello and even unmute yourself. And unmute, say hi, because there's so many people here, nobody will notice you. Um, okay. We are honored to introduce Lyor Shternberg, who is an award-winning poet, a translator of English literature, and an editor. He published 7 poetry books, and the last one just recently is a selection of his poetry. And Lyor will be the host of this show, and he will shortly present Tony Curtis. But first of all, some technical issues. Your microphone will be on mute during the conversation, but we will dedicate some time at the end for your questions. And you can write in the chat box questions or just any enthusiastic remarks that you have. And every now and then, we will check it and present Tony what people are saying in Hebrew. And now I'm very happy to pass the microphone to you, Lyor, and wish you a pleasant meeting.
Thank you, Gilad. And thank you, Gilad and Noah and Poetry Place. It's a great event, and it's a brilliant idea that we can speak like this and communicate and host poets from all over the world. And so it's fantastic, and I'm really happy about it. And I'm really, really happy to see and talk to Tony Curtis once again after approximately 12 years, because we met for the first time on the Mishkanot Festival on 2006. And yeah, it's a long time ago, 14 years actually.
Yeah.
And since then, we've been on contact because I fell in love with the poetry, and so he gave me the book, and I started translating it, of course, and I managed to publish a printed book. So it's brilliant, and I'm very, very happy about it. I'll say a few words about Tony Curtis, and then we'll just start, I think, reading a little bit, and Tony will speak about himself better than myself. But Tony Curtis is an Irish poet. He published, I think, about 15 poetry books. The last of them is a poetry book, which also is a kind of novel. It's called This Flight Tonight. It's based on an historic event. And I'm very glad that we are doing this. So, Tony, would you like to say something, or we should start by reading?
I just start by saying I'm delighted to see you, and I'm delighted I got the computer to work. And I think it's extraordinary that, see, I feel like I'm just talking to you, and your bookshelf is behind you. They're so orderly. Your place is so, and the other great thing, I love birthdays, and today is Shakespeare's birthday, the 23rd of April. And the fascinating thing is, it's also his death day. It's also the day he died. He had this fantastic, to die on the day you were born is something very, it's like Mark Twain, isn't it?
It says that saints are born and die on the same day. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. He was a saint to some people.
Some sort, yeah.
And then it's also William Wordsworth. He died today.
Okay, I didn't know that.
He died on Shakespeare's birthday. And that, see, I love birthdays. It seems if you're born on the 13th in Ireland, there's a good chance as a writer you'll win the Nobel Prize for Literature, because last week, or 2 weeks back was it now, on the 13th of April was Seamus Heaney's birthday, the last man to win the Nobel Prize and for Ireland for Literature. And the man before him, Samuel Beckett, his birthday was 13th of April.
Okay.
And the man before that who won it on the 13th was W.B. Yeats. And he was born on 13th of June. See, anyway, I love birthdays, yeah. Okay. So it's a great day to have this Shakespeare's birthday.
Okay. Thank
When
you.
is your birthday? Tony,
Sorry?
when is your birthday? Your birthday is...
My birthday is 25th of March.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, same as Elton John's.
How can you remember all this? Okay.
Yeah.
It's really nice. And you've mentioned a lot of poets, and maybe later we'll speak about your connection with poets, because you write and say a lot of things about poets that you're connected to. But I'll ask something about it later.
Yes.
I would like, if maybe just to begin with one or two poems from the presentation that maybe you'll read in English and I read in Hebrew, and maybe you will want to say a few words about about them. So
nice.
the first poem is called Folk.
Yep.
Which is the title poem from a book called Folk. In Hebrew, I left the original word in English because it doesn't translate anywhere near what you are meaning to say, because folk in Hebrew is like it's people, but you also mean parents. So
well, I mean everything to do. I mean, what's fascinating was when I wrote this poem, I decided that this poem would be the title poem for the book, and I'd call the book Folk. So then on that day, myself and my friend Paula Meehan, she was going to call her new book The Wolf Tree. The Wolf Tree.
Okay.
And we opened up our computers and we went to the big library to see how many books were called The Wolf Tree. I'll never forget this day. And she pressed the button and waited for the machine to come up with how many books were called The Wolf Tree. And there was 3 books called The Wolf Tree, and one had been published previous week in Canada. So she couldn't call our book The Wolf Tree. And I put in the word folk, thinking there would be 1,000 books, 100,000 books called folk. And there had never been a book called folk.
Okay.
Because folk is a great word. It's like a magnet. It's a word that attracts words to it. Folk music, folk dancing, folk everything, folk's sake. So, and this poem came about because when my father died, he left me his Bible. And in the Bible, he left a photograph. This photograph here. But it's only, he left it, it's really small. I have it here somewhere. I'll show you the size of it. And he did a very strange thing, knowing the kind of person I was. He left me his Bible, ever hopeful. And then he left me this photograph. And he didn't do a normal thing, like write on the back of the photograph. He wrote on the front of the photograph, like that, yeah. Rosscray is a monastery, or a town in Ireland. My father's 3 brothers were Cistercian monks in a silent order. They were men who didn't speak. And now my mother says about me, and now Tony's going around the world making up for the 3 of them, right? Speaking enough. So what happened was when my father died, he knew I would write a poem about this photograph because he wrote on the front of the photograph. A normal person would write on the back of the photograph. And I got this photograph blown up and it hangs in my mother's kitchen. And one day I said to her, "Ma'am, I'm going to put you on the cover of my next book." And she said, "And wouldn't me being on the cover of the book have anything to do with the book?" So I said, "Well, I write a poem about the photograph." And she said, "Must you?" And I said, yep. And then I said to her, "I'll have to do some research. Who took the photograph?" To protect the coat I have underneath. I worked a month overtime in the sewing factory to buy that coat, hand-stitched Italian. And if I hadn't known that in 60 years' time, I'd be on the cover of a book, I'd have taken off that bloody raincoat. And that's her memory. And I read poems. I go to asylums and prisons, and I work with drug addicts and alcoholics, all sorts of bendy people. But one of the hardest things I ever had to do was to sit in the kitchen in my mother's house, just me and her, and read this poem to her about my parents. Very hard thing to do. There's books written about Irish sons and their mothers. So here's a poem called Folk. Such a warm little word, full of greens and browns, like something woven a thread into the past, something to hold on to in the dark. If I say the word quietly to myself, I think of a photograph I found in my father's Bible after he died. The End of Prayer, Roscrea, 1948. Sunday morning after early mass, my folk stand ready for the road, a motorbike between them, like a man in a yard holding open a sack. Throw in the breeze, the ditches, the lanes that weave to the widening fields. It is the end of November, the feast of St. James of the Marshes. Winter is in the air. They are dressed for weather. So close, my mother wears my father's heavy raincoat. He wears goggles and gloves, as if with the right words. So long, God bless. The motorbike will lift off into the clouds like a magic carpet. Hold on, I hear him say to my mother as the road, the fields, and the houses fade away. And she did, tightly, with both arms for the rest of their lives.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Thank you for the poem and thank you for the story behind it. I'll just read the Hebrew and maybe I'll ask you something. פולק, מילה קטנה וחמימה כזו, מלאה ירוקים וחומים, כמו משהו ארוג, חוט אל תוך העבר, משהו להאחז בו בחשיכה. באומרי את המילה בשקט לעצמי, אני חושב על תמונה שמצאתי בספר התנ"ך של אבי, לאחר שמת. סיומה של תפילה, בוס קרי, 1948. בוקר יום ראשון בתום המיסה המוקדמת. הוריי מוכנים לצאת לדרך. האופנוע ניצב ביניהם כמו איש הפוער שק לרווחה בחצר. הוסיפו את הרוח, השוחות, המשעולים המסתרגים דרך שדות. הלאה? סוף נובמבר. הילולת ג'יימס הקדוש. חורף באוויר. הם לבושים בהתאם, קרובים כל כך. אמי לובשת את מעיל הגשם הכבד של אבי. הוא במשקפי שערה לראשו וכפפות. כאילו בישמע המילים, צאו לשלום, התנסה האופנוע אל תוך העננים, כמו שטיח קסמים. החזיקי חזק, אני שומע אותו, אומר לאמי, שעה שהדרך, השדות, הבתים, נמוגים והולכים. וכך עשתה, בחוזקה, בשתי ידיה, למשך שארית חייהם. Okay, so this is the poem in Hebrew. And I wanted to ask in continuation for this point that you have a sort of combination between biographical facts and something, sometimes you add fiction or imaginary things until it's sometimes it's hard to know what is true and what is fictional, which is fine. This is poetry, but if you can say something about it, because I see it in many poems and maybe also in the next one.
Yes. You always hear Emily Dickinson saying, tell the truth, but tell it slant, right? Tell the truth, but tell it slant. And the problem with me is I tell so many stories about my poems that now that I'm 65, I don't know which stories are true anymore. That's the truth. I've told so many lies, and I will say what I go for the poem. If it's biographical, which this poem is, I will stretch it to make it better, to make it the best poem I can. You know, I'm not stuck with saying, well, it wasn't like that. And that's what sometimes if my mother comes and sits in the audience and watches me, you know, and I'm telling a story, and she says in her head, it didn't happen like that. But then I put people in poems and people don't recognize themselves in poems. I don't think you recognize yourself in a poem. Even if somebody's standing in front of you reading a poem about you, I don't think you recognize yourself. I'm a very simple poet. You know, I'm a storyteller. That's really what I am.
It's exactly what I want to ask you about because this is something I see in many of your poems and also in the way you read in front of public, that you are sort of a storyteller, and I call it a bardic poet.
Yeah,
someone who tried to bewitch his audience in a way, and you do it because. And many times I know that you are also recite from memory, which is amazed me because I can't remember a line I wrote. And this leads me to the next poem I ask you to include in this presentation with Kurak. And I will really remember the time I heard you recite it in Mishkanot, and it amazed me because I never heard anything like this.
Yeah.
And this is exactly the kind of thing that I asked you earlier, because I feel it's a mix between biography and fiction and folklore and myth, unrecognizable but beautiful.
Yes, I'll tell you why I wrote it. Maybe I'll tell you first why I wrote it, and then
wait.
What happened was that I was in Western Australia. I was doing the schools and poetry readings in Australia. I go to Australia every year, and I was in Australia. This is a long, long time ago, and it was after school, and I was sitting in Fremantle, out in the sunshine, and you know, being Irish, we're not used to the sun. Somebody tried to put an umbrella over me to cover me, to put me in the shade. I nearly broke his arm because I was explaining to the waiter that I was thawing out. I was from Ireland, you know, and then a man came down the street, and he walked by me, and I always dressed the same. You probably haven't noticed, but I always dress the same, black and white. I think it comes because I come from a long line of Cistercian monks. I think I'm comfortable in same clothes every day. And this man walked by me, and he stopped, and then he came back, and he said to me, "You wouldn't happen to be a poet by any chance?" You see, and I didn't know whether he answered that or whether he'd seen me reading and wanted to punch me, you know, poetry at school or something, some trauma in his life or something happened. But what happened was I had been in his daughter's school, and his daughter had explained to him that we had this funny man in today. He was dressed like a penguin or a banker, you know, black and white. And I don't stand out so much in Ireland. In Ireland, lots of men wear black and white. But in Western Australia, where they wear short, shorts and T-shirts, I really stand out. I look like an undertaker or a taxi driver. And so I really stand out. So she'd obviously said what I looked like. And what happened was, why he asked me was because his father and his grandfather were from the Achill Island, an island off the west of Ireland.
Yeah, no.
And they had been boat builders. And they made the Irish boats called the curragh. Mm-hmm. And this guy, Declan, he got his father to teach him to make a boat. And he made this beautiful boat in Western Australia, in Fremantle. And he wanted a poet to say a poem at the launch of the boat. And then over the next couple of months, I got to know Declan quite well. And I got to know that all he wanted to hear was, "This is Declan's boat, hope it's going to float." And that would have done him, you know, happy with that. But I wrote this, and this is more the reason why he made the boat. Why immigrants, you know, 13,000 miles from Ireland, why he made this Irish boat. And as you said, Lyor, if you were standing in front of me, Lyor, I could say the poem. But on the computer, it's so nerve-wracking. I'm just going to read. Curragh. This is my boat. I made it with my own hands. I took salt from a bitter wind, hair from a horse's mane, threads from a woman's blouse. 3 stories, my father told me. The sideways look my mother has when she is curious and alone. Her silent prayers. A few rusty nails from the kitchen door. 3 views of the island. 1 in mist, 1 in rain, 1 rocking in a drunken sea. No flowers. My people had no love of leaves. They saw boats in trees. Now the boats are gone and the hills are bare. At night, I sewed curses into the oars, rubbed fish oil into the wood, for I knew the journey that lay ahead. My people's story was written on water. most of it is washed away. My grandfather knew the tale, but he'd not tell it. His ghost sits in the stern, saying, the future is a steady course. Row strongly.
Thank you very much.
That's cool.
It's,
I could show you a Korok, in case anybody's never seen a Korok. Can you see that picture there? See the three men carrying the boat on the top of their heads?
Yeah.
That's a Korok.
Oh.
This is and the cover of the cover of my second last book. That picture there, the cover of my book. That's the side of a Korok up really close, like really like this, you know.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow, great. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll read the Hebrew.
Okay.
קורק. זו סירתי. עשיתי אותה בשתי ידיי. נטלתי מלח מן הרוח המרה, שיער מרעמת הסוס, חוט וחולצת אישה. 3 סיפורים סיפר לי אבי. מבטה הנוטה לצד של אמי כשהיא סקרנית ולבדה, תפילותיה החרישיות, כמה מסמרים חלודים מדלת המטבח. 3 מראות של האי, בערפל, בגשם, וכשהוא מתנודד בים שיכור, בלי פרחים. בני עמי לא אהבו עלים. בעצים הם ראו סירות. עתה הסירות אינן והגבעות חשופות. בלילות זרעתי כללות אל תוך המשוטים, משכתי את העץ בשמן דגים, כי ידעתי מהו המסע שמצפה לי. סיפורם של בני עמי כתוב על המים. רובו כבר נשטף בזרם. סבי הכיר את המעשה, אך לא היה מוכן לספרו. רוח הרפאים שלו יושבת ברכתיים ואומרת, העתיד הוא נתיב איתן, חתור וכוח. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to hear them in Hebrew, the poems.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
When you sent me your book, I didn't know which way to hold it. I didn't know which way to open it. You know.
Okay.
The only words I knew was Tony Curtis.
Okay, we're doing it right to left.
Oh yes, yeah. I saw the word Korok. You didn't change that word. You hasn't got a word in Hebrew for Korok.
No, because
really funny because
if I would, we have a word for boat, which is sira, but boat is general and Korok is very, very specific. So I put the word and I put in a footnote that said this is a typical boat for Ireland and Scotland.
Yes, but they must have had very old boats in them, like made of. These are made of. They used to be made, I'd say, from cow skin, skin leathers and wood. Really primitive boat, but very seaworthy, very brilliant. Carry it on your head.
The last stanza, we repeat it all the time in the poetry place.
Oh, that's lovely to
we
hear.
always say to each other.
Yeah. Oh yes, row strongly.
Yeah. It's a great line.
Yeah, row strongly. Yes. That's my friend John Sheehan, the fiddle player, when he plays his fiddle on a tune called Anna Coon, beautiful tune about people in a Korok going to a wedding. It's an old story, and they brought a goat for the wedding, and the goat put its foot through the skin of the boat, and everybody was drowned. And it's a song it's a tune that's loved in the west of Ireland. So when we're there in the west of Ireland, he plays the tune on the fiddle, and I say the poem like without the book. I just say it. Isn't everybody crying? It's fantastic. And everybody buys me a drink. Happy day. Okay. Oh, that's the old days when things were open.
Yes.
Yeah,
I forgot about it because we are already here, but the world was different months and a half ago. Yeah.
This is the most sober I've ever been in my life. I haven't had a drink for, I don't know what it is, 2 or 3 months now, something like that.
Okay.
Which is really, I can't drink at home. I'm not that.
Okay. So you miss the pubs.
I miss the pubs. It's the only hobby I have left is the pub, and because of the way I live, the whole country of Ireland now is living like poets. We all getting the same amount of money, and it's very strange. Because anyway, it doesn't matter. But it's strange. It's strange.
Yeah.
Jigsaw puzzles and books. People are doing jigsaw puzzles. There's a great rush on jigsaw puzzles. I love jigsaw puzzles. When I go on my holidays, I make jigsaw puzzles on top of each other. I make 10 jigsaw puzzles maybe.
Okay, I never did that. Okay.
And I make them on top of it, yeah. And they're all, I should send you photographs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Another poem, maybe?
I'll do another poem. We do, which next? In the Wilderness, I think.
We can do it.
Or whichever one you want. You say, yeah.
The next one is fair weather, but...
fair weather, we'll do fair weather, yep, that's good.
Okay.
I'll tell you about fair weather. Yeah.
Fair weather is also about something that you write about a lot.
That's me about my birthday. I've been 60, when I was 60. I wrote fair weather on my 60th birthday. And I wrote it in a place called Fort Casey on Whidbey Island in Washington State. I was watching the boat going back and forth between Port Townsend on the other side with the Olympic Mountains behind. I was watching this old, the old freighter, old boat going back and forth, back and forth, back. And I said to myself, I'm like that old boat. All my life I go from, school to school, or I just write poem to poem, book to book. And I presume I'll just keep going until I die like that. But as I get older, I get like the old boat. I get leaky and I list, and I'm not in very good shape. And I thought it was a nice poem for my 60th. The whole book, Tony Curtis, approximately in the key of C, C for Curtis. What happened was, see, my book before this was called, the book before this was called Pony by Tony. And the book before that was called Folk. So they were all very small titles. And so I decided I needed a title with a bit of razzmatazz, a bit of dazzle.
Okay.
So I said I'm approximately in the key of C. And this came from a sign in a museum. You can read the poem in the book. But anyway, so fair. And then, so a lot of the poems in this book are about being 60. I tell when people ask me how old I am, I say I'm 55 and a bit, because it's too traumatic to say. I can't even sing the Beatles song anymore. The Beatles song, when I'm 64. I have to say when I was. I was 6. It's terrible. Yeah. So fair weather. I wrote this in America. And this is it, fair weather. Do poets ever reach their destination? I ask not because I think they are like country buses, though their minds are often overcrowded, and they do tend to take the long way round. I ask because any I've ever met have been uneasy, watchful, just arrived or just about to leave, restless as the postman on his bicycle. In truth, I was thinking of ships, rusted old cargo ships, especially those you see late at night out beyond the bay, their light fading, their cargo a mystery, their destination unknown. Too late, alas, to wish the captain fair weather. Last week at the end of the pier, I hailed a sailor. Welcome home. I know, he said, we docked last night, we're heading out. The end of a voyage is the beginning of a voyage. I wished him fair weather. As I watched his frail craft batter the wind, I thought, it's the same for poets. The end of a poem is the beginning of a poem. And so I ask again, do poets ever reach their destination?
Okay, thank you. I'll read it in Hebrew. Great first line. Great poem. מזג אוויר נאה. האם משוררים מגיעים אי פעם ליעדם? אני שואל, לא משום שהם דומים לאוטובוסים כפריים, אם כי נפשם צפופה מדי והם אכן נוטים להעדיף דרכים עוקפות. אני שואל משום שכל מי שפגשתי היו מודאגים, דרוכים, רק הגיעו או בדיוק עומדים לצאת, חסרי מנוחה כמו דבר על אופניו. האמת היא שחשבתי על ספינות מטען ישנות וחלודות, במיוחד כאלה שאפשר לראות בלילה, הרחק מעבר למפרץ. אורן מתעמען, מתענן, תעלומה, יעדן, לא ידוע. מאוחר מכדי לאחל לרב החובל מזג אוויר נאה. בשבוע שעבר בקצה המזח קראתי אל מלאך. ברוך הבא. לא, הוא אמר, הגענו אתמול בלילה. אנחנו עומדים לפליג. סופו של מסע ותחילתו של מסע. החלתי לו מזג אוויר נאה, וכשצפיתי בספינתו השברירית נאבקת ברוח, חשבתי, כך זה גם עם משוררים. סופו של שיר ותחילתו של שיר. ולכן אני שואל שנית, האם משוררים מגיעים אי פעם ליעדם? Okay, thank you. So, I want to ask you, as an introduction to the next point, you said earlier that you, part of what you're doing as a poet, that you're going to, your work within poetry to children and you are going to asylums and to prisons. And it's very interesting for me because it's very generous. And so can you say something a little bit about it? And then we'll read In the Wilderness, which is exactly this.
Oh yeah, I go to well, I go anywhere. Anybody asks me, I'll go. Here I am with you, and I'm delighted to be here. But in Ireland, I've been going to the big asylum in Dublin. It's called the Central Mental Hospital, right? The Central Mental Hospital, but we call it the Sentimental Hospital, and the Sentimental Hospital. You have my book Folk, and in the book Folk, I have lots of poems about going.
Yes.
I asked the people in the asylums, you know, you're in the asylum. When you're on the mobile phone to your friend, where do you say you are? You know, you don't say, I'm in the, you don't ring up your friends and say, I'm in the asylum. So you say, I'm in the caravan park, or I'm in the traffic island, I'm in the wigwam. It's a big list in that book Folk of what they, I like to, a lot of writers who've been in mental institutions have a great name. Brendan Behan called it the puzzle factory. Elizabeth Bishop called it the Luna bin. Samuel Beckett called it the building where the tears of the world are held, which I love. So lots of that stuff. So I love going to the asylum. I play the guitar and I sing, and it's great at Christmas time when we're all singing Fairy Tale New York or something. I like to think the people going by outside, you hear everybody singing, you know, it's good. And I'm very popular in the asylum. And they once sent a few people from the Arts Council to find out why I was so popular. And I have the report, they sent me the report, and it says that when they were asked, the inmates, or the people, the patients, when they were asked why they liked Tony so much, they said, well, the fact that they let Tony out into the world, there's hope for us. You know, they think I'm madder than they are. And I really like that about them. I like the prisons too. I like to go and talk to the prisoners. But all that, since the crash in 2008 or 10, whatever it was, the last crash, a lot of that work has dried up. The money is all gone. So, and this poem, In the Wilderness, this came from one day when I was in the asylum. And I'd read a poem called Civil War, about the Irish Civil War, and how in a school one day I was talking about the Civil War in Ireland, and the students thought I was talking about the American Civil War. That's how history is. And I was saying, when the Americans said that when Abraham Lincoln had died, the Americans said, we've lost our Moses. We've lost our Moses. And then I asked a man to help me read a poem in the asylum. And when he stood up, I said, what's your name? And he said, my name is Moses. And I looked, and this is not like being in a classroom or in a college. So I was wondering, because I was talking about Moses, was he? And if he was Moses, he had the best T-shirt on. What he had written on his T-shirt was fantastic. So I shook his hand and I said, well, I'm delighted to meet you, Moses. And next week when I come, I'll have a poem for you. And the poem, the start of this book, Tony Curtis, the epigraph at the start is a line from one of my all-time favorite poets, John Clare. And John Clare's line is, John Clare spent maybe 30 years in the mental institution. I'm not sure about how many years, but he was locked up for a long, long time. And he was a fabulous poet. And his line was, I have a friend I value here, and that's a quiet mind. I have a friend I value here, and that's a quiet mind. Good line for these times of isolation. So that's at the front of my, and somewhere at the front. And it appears in this poem. I recommend everybody go and read John Clare. He died in 1865. Yeah. In the wilderness. I met Moses in the asylum, in a yellow room that smelt of sorrow. He'd given up the sweeping robes and carrying a wooden staff. He was wearing denims and a t-shirt that said, "Follow me on Twitter." In his small way, he was still leading lost souls out of the wilderness. When he stood up, he was smaller than I had imagined. Together, we read a poem about Connemara ponies. Blessed creatures, he said they were. He had the deepest brown eyes, but it is his voice I will remember. It was 10,000 miles of dusty roads. It was a parched riverbed, a dried out well. More broken twigs than biblical thunder. When I was leaving, he handed me a scrap of paper with 2 lines written out in pencil. I have a friend I value here, and that's a quiet mind. It was his map out of the wilderness.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll read the Hebrew. אוקיי. במדבר. פגשתי את משה במוסד לחולי נפש, בחדר צהוב שהריח מצער. הוא ויתר כבר על הגלימות המתנופפות ועל מטה העץ. הוא לבש מכנסי ג'ינס ועל חולצת הפי שלו היה כתוב, עקבו אחריי בטוויטר. בדרכו הצנועה הזו עדיין הוביל נשמות אבודות אל מחוץ למדבר. כשקם על רגליו הוא היה נמוך מששיערתי. יחד קראנו שיר על סוסי הפוני של קונמרה. יצורים ברוכים כינה אותם. היו לו עיניים חומות, כה עמוקות, אבל היה זה קולו שאזכור. הוא היה 10,000 מייל של דרכים מאובקות. הוא היה אפיק נהר חרב, באר יבשה, זרדים שבורים, לא רעם תנכי. כשקמתי לצאת, הוא הושיט לי פיסה של נייר, עליה 2 שורות כתובות בעיפרון. יש לי חבר כאן שיקר לליבי, וזה מזור לנפש. זו הייתה המפה שלו מחוץ למדבר. Okay, this is the Hebrew. Okay. Maybe I'll ask a general question, which is a very, we talked a lot about when you write, how you write, but what are your inspirations? This is quite a banal question, but it's always interesting. Where are you writing from?
Where we're from? At the moment, I'm reading 7th century Chinese poetry. I'm reading Du Fu, you know?
Yeah, I know him.
Yeah, when I was at college, he was Tu Fu, but now he's Du Fu, and that's how old I am. And I'm reading Han Sang, Coal Mountain poems. I'm a big fan of poets like Gary Snyder, but I like Du Fu. I'm writing about. I'm doing another thing now for a book of photographs, and I'm finding great inspiration from Du Fu. I recommend Du Fu to everybody. He's down here.
There are several translations of him.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
China's most popular poet. He's like a saint in China, and he was bendy. Like he terrible poverty, lived through wars and terrible, very, very hard life. But he turned all that harshness, that just life into like same way as Osip Mandelstam or these great poets can take life and just turn it into electricity. It's fantastic. But I really like Du Fu, and I'm hoping he'll inspire me now for my next book.
Wow.
I'm not great on the word inspiration. I do believe in long, dull hours of work. Like I have a routine. I get up every morning, every day, very early, and I go out and somebody makes my breakfast for me, and then I go out and I sit in my. If it's raining, I sit in my car, and I write my poems, looking out to sea. Turn the phone off. I've got 3 islands in front of me. So 3 islands appear not flat in my poetry. I got a long beach, and I walk the beach, and I like to walk and say the poem as I'm writing it. So that's why when I Curragh was probably a newer poem when I met you 14 years ago. And I could say all those poems off the top of my head. But I haven't got that. Years ago when I was young, I used to go on stage with no book. I used to just go out and say the poems. But I haven't got that in mind anymore. It's like the leaky ship I was telling you about. It does that. Yeah. So, yeah, I have all these are all the new. These are my new. These are the new poems I'm writing about. I've written 20 poems about women poets. So every famous poets.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah, writing,
it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, I always write to, if you read all my books, you see, I always write to a theme. I always mostly have a theme, so that I don't wake up in the morning and say, what will I write about? I know what I'm going to write about. What's this? So this one, I have a book about ponies. It's all pony poems. And then I have the one about the plane. That was an obsession that got out of hand. Gosh, it's a huge book. And I always have a theme. And a book about Tibet. I wrote a book about Tibet.
Yeah.
I wrote a book about bicycles. I wrote a book. So it just means that when I don't have to think about what I'm going to write about. It's, you know, Hemingway, when Hemingway wrote, he always finished the night halfway. He never finished the last sentence. And so the next day when he took up his pen, he started with that sentence and he finished the sentence.
Okay.
You know, Yeats was happy with 4 lines a day. He thought 2 lines was a good day. And Joyce was happy sometimes with just 4 words a day. So it can be. There is a great story about him writing one day, and Nora, his wife, went by and she says, "How's the writing?" He says, "Oh, good. And she looked down, he only had 2 words on the page. And she said, "What's the problem?" Well, he says, "Not the writing, it's the order of the words." And I have a poem called Penance. And in the first line, I wrote the poem in about 10 minutes. But there was 1 word missing from the first line. And that took me about 5 days or 4 days to get the word, to fit into the sentence. You know, it was about the west of Ireland. And I ended up getting thrown out of a pub, and I ended up getting thrown out. My wife asked me to take the children to the beach and stand out in the rain, anything to stop me looking for the word. It was just to describe the west of Ireland. And still they live in, you know, like that. Still they live in lonely places. Still they live in isolated places. Still they live in, like, I had all these words for what it was. And then after about 4 days, my friend Jack Bradley, who does theatre, he starts shouting words at me. And we like they're doing the drama, all this. And he said the word forgiven. And once I heard that word, I knew the word was unforgiven. And still they live in unforgiven places on the sides of arthritic hills, where low walls hide the sea and the sea hides the dead of the dead, like that, you know. So sometimes it's not, writing can be a struggle, you know. If you ever read Gary Snyder's poem, What You Should Know to Be a Poet, it's a fantastic poem, because it's not what you think. He puts in the list. It's a great list poem, you know, all about cartoons of bubblegum, the names of exotic planets, everything. It's a fantastic poem, beautiful. And
thank you, Tony.
Reading is one of the best things to do, to write.
Of course.
Reading, yeah.
Of course, yes.
That's why, I mean, Elizabeth Bishop only published 70 poems in her life. Du Fu published 1,400. Elizabeth Bishop, and Emily Dickinson, 2,000. So yes. Elizabeth Bishop's last book, 10 poems.
I didn't know that, okay.
And it's a fantastic, and everything about that last book, Geography 3, is so beautifully made. And it's only 10 poems. But it's very funny, because the epigraph at the start is from her school book when she was a child in Nova Scotia. You know, it still bothered her school book, what it said in her school book. I love the fact that a 60-year-old poet was still bothered about the lessons she had when she was 5 and 6. And it's beautiful. It's just beautiful. Yeah. That'd be one of my all-time favorite books. And I just love her. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
She's all bendy too. So, like, do
she what?
Bendy. You know, she's she kind of comes trailing baggage. You know, it's dust, and it's a bit of a calamity. But out of this is made this most beautiful poems. Her poem, The Moose, is fantastic. She was writing it for 18 years, the poem, right? And after about 18 years, she stood up in Harvard and she said, "This is a new poem, The Moose. I'm not quite sure whether it's finished yet." And she still had another 6 years to write. But it's very funny to think that a poem could take that long. See, it isn't about quantity, it's quality. And she was the best. She was really good.
Thank you. These are beautiful stories. Thank you very much.
Tony. You're bringing me. Yeah. So,
well, I think we learned a lot about how you work and how your mind works and how you write.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
I was listening this morning now to John Prine. Poor John Prine died last week. And he was one of my favorite songwriters, John Prine. And I was listening to this. I always found it beautiful. You watch him on the YouTube.
Okay.
He died of the corona or COVID. That killed him at 73. Well, he had cancer twice, but he was brilliant. Great songwriter, John Prine. Yeah.
Okay, I look for him.
You like him? Yeah.
Maybe we'll read now the two last poems, which are shorter, and then we'll leave time for questions.
Yep.
If they're wise, I look at the chat box.
Okay.
Okay. Two beautiful short poems. One is a love poem, I think, and the other one, I'll ask you something about it.
Yeah.
So the next one is the Old Grey Herons.
Should show you this, the Old Grey Herons. Yes. When I won last year, it was 43. When I won last year, I was awarded the Lawrence O'Shaughnessy Award. I was last year, the year before last, in Minnesota, the big Irish-American prize for poetry. And it was a great honor. But they asked C.B. Sherlock, the great printmaker, to choose one of my poems from my books and turn it into a print for the occasion in St. Thomas University. And she did. And she made it into this beautiful print.
Wow!
Right? It's all, and there she has it with the thing. So of all my poems, this is the one. And it's fascinating. You don't like to ask a person like, what did you like about this poem more than others? I was at a funeral one time, and because I'm an old recovering Catholic, I say that about myself. I'm a recovering Catholic. You know, my mother goes to mass every day. My father went to mass. All his brothers were monks. So sometimes when I'm going to do a poetry reading in a town, and the poetry reading's at 8 o'clock, instead of going to a bar or anything like that, I'll go and sit in the church and look at the old stuff, because that's what my father used to do. My father used to make church furniture. And the night I was sitting in the church at 5 o'clock or 5:30, and a funeral started, like you do in the church. And during the funeral, a woman got up and she said one of my poems. And I nearly fell out of the seat. And then off they went, and I couldn't go after the woman and say, "Excuse me, why did you choose that poem?" But that was just freaky. That's one of the weirdest things that ever happened in my life. So this is the Old Grey Herons. This is a love poem of sorts. The Old Grey Herons. What are we now, you ask? I want to tell you we are a river, but in truth, we are two birds, two old grey herons. So I tried to tell you of one I saw standing by a river in Oregon, a thin creature that reminded me of you. I am not sure if we like each other anymore, but the old love, like the silver in your hair, will never fade. Watching that heron, a stillness came over me, as if my soul had opened a heavy door. It was the exact same stillness I felt the first time I met you.
Okay, thank you. I'll read it in Hebrew. שתי הענפות הזקנות. מה אנחנו עכשיו, את שואלת? אני רוצה לומר לך שאנחנו נהר, אבל האמת היא שאנחנו שתי ציפורים. שתי ענפות זקנות אפורות. כך שאני מנסה לספר לך על אחת שראיתי עומדת ליד נהר באורגון. בצור כחוש שהזכיר לי אותך. אני לא בטוח אם אנחנו עוד מחבבים זה את זה, אבל האהבה הישנה, כמו הכסף בשערך, לא תדהה לעולם. כשהיבטתי בענפה ירדה עליי שלווה, כאילו פתחה נפשי דלת כבדה. הייתה זו אותה שלווה בדיוק שהרגשתי בפעם הראשונה שפגשתי בך. So, okay, thank you.
And I can remember the day I wrote that poem, because I'd written the day before was Gary Snyder's birthday, and I wrote 2 poems for his birthday, the great poet from Oregon. And I remember the next day I wrote that poem. So that was inspired by reading Gary Snyder and thinking about Gary Snyder.
Interesting.
Yep.
It's nice you remember.
Oh yes, I remember them. They're like photographs. They're like they're like little bits of they're like prayers.
Yeah.
I don't do anything else. I've never had a job, not a proper job, you know, where you get up in the morning and
You're lucky.
I don't. Yeah, well, others are lucky, I think. But I wouldn't be a nice person to work with. I'd be sacked by lunchtime. I just wouldn't. I have this problem with that same problem I had at school. If somebody tells me to do something, I do the opposite. Whatever that condition is, I had that at school, and I wasn't any good as you know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But that's, you know, I was no good at school until I went to college. I always find that fascinating. That you know, university suited me in a way school didn't suit me. See, at school they told you to do things. At university they didn't care whether you did anything. You know, it was up to you. If you didn't do it, nobody came and knocked on your door. You didn't get, you know, just throw you out.
I can sympathize with that, yes.
Yeah.
I want to ask you something which leads to the next poem, the last I think we'll read. You have something, you said you are recovering Catholic.
Yeah.
You have something very religious in your poem, which is religious, metaphysical. You see things sometimes in a way that you see the ordinary thing, and then you elevate it to a different level, which I think what happens in the Easter Monday. But if you can, of course, read the poem and say something about the way you see
Yeah.
this metaphysical thing.
Well, the thing about this poem is, I wrote this poem driving along the road in the car, and I wrote this poem in my head, and I wrote it quicker than it takes to say the poem. I wrote the poem, and I have about 4 or 5 poems in my life that I wrote. They just come fully formed. I have to pull the car in and stop and write it down before I forget it. But the fact that I wrote all this, and I wrote it because when we were at school, we did Adelsstop, a poem by Edward Thomas, and I really liked his poetry. One of the few things I liked at school was poetry. And I had a good memory, so I was good at poetry in school because I could remember the poems. And I think this used to drive the teachers mad. That how can such a stupid person be good at poetry? And see, and I've some of the best poets I've ever met have been really stupid people, but just beautiful minds. But they don't function like a normal person. But this one of my favorite poets is W.B. Yeats' Easter, 1916, the great poem. And so Edward Thomas, what happened was I was reading the book called All Roads Lead to France, about the life of Edward Thomas. And then I saw that he died in Arras on I think it was the 9th of April, 1917. But it was Easter Monday. And I'm driving along in the car, recovering Catholic in the car, and I'm thinking to myself, Jesus rose from the dead on Easter Sunday, and Edward Thomas died on Easter Monday. So then suddenly the poem comes fully formed when I say, the morning after Christ rose from the dead, Philip, Edward, Thomas ascended into heaven from a field in France. They must just have missed each other in the lane. Shadows, though the mud of Arras and the mud of Calvary must have been on their hands and on their boots when they stepped into the light. Yeah. So just, but he was a brilliant poet. I mean, he was the man really responsible for Robert Frost.
He gave you inspiration.
No. Robert Frost, and they were, when Robert Frost came to England in the early part of the 20th century, his best friend was Edward Thomas. And what happened was Frost was writing away in England and having little success. And this woman started to write to him from America. And Edward Thomas came to the house and says, I hear Mrs. Holt is writing to you. And he said, yeah, some American woman keeps writing to me. And he was throwing the letters in the bin. And he says to Frost, do you know who Mrs. Holt is? He says, yes, some American woman. And Edward Thomas says to him, she's a big fan of your poetry. Yes, so he says, her husband is the biggest publisher of poetry in America. And then he dived into the bin. And if you look at it, if you get a Robert Frost, I'll take a Robert Frost off the shelf. If you take a Robert Frost book like this is north of Boston. You can see who published it. Henry Holt and Company.
So you made a good deal.
Yeah, and this is the second edition of the book. I bought for $8. It's worth $8. If I had a first edition of this book, I could pay off my mortgage. So that's poetry books. But it is lovely to get as close to the original copy as you can. Like this is as close to what Robert Frost would have held in his hands. And again, you'll notice a lot of my books when you open them the same way as Robert Frost. He has a children's poem at the front. And I do that too. I have a children's poem at the front and a children's poem at the back. And the children's poem at the front, it's like a talisman. The book can only get better if you start with a children's poem. You know, my big book, that one, this flight tonight, the one about the airplane, the first men to fly over an ocean in an airplane. That starts off with a little poem for 6 or 7-year-olds. What goes up must come down. This we learned from Alcock and Brown, who stole it from the birds, who took it from the autumn leaves, who saw the day a boy stepped onto the grass with his kite and let the wind take it up and away. So what I'll do, Lyor, is when this whole mayhem is finished, I'll send you that book. I wouldn't expect you to translate it because it's too big. But,
I'll be glad to read it.
But you can translate the children's poem.
I'll try, no problem.
Yeah.
Thank you for the story. So I just read the Hebrew for the Easter Monday, and maybe then we'll say a few words for conclusion. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yom Sheni.
We'll have some questions. Well,
yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure you do, Gilad.
אוקיי, גלעד. יום שני של הפסחה, 1917. בבוקר לאחר שישו קם מן המתים, פיליפ אדוארד תומאס עלה לשמיים, מתוך שדה בצרפת. הם החמיצו זה את זה בוודאי, במשעול, צללים, אם כי הבוץ של ארס והבוץ של גולגולתה, ודאי היו דבוקים עוד לסוליותיהם ולידיהם שפסעו אל תוך האור. האור, the light. Okay, questions.
There was this question, did you ever write a poem in a pub?
Oh, yes, hundreds of poems. Yes. Oh, that's especially a haiku. You know, I'd sit and write haiku. I can say haiku off the top of my head, but yeah, I would have written. Yes, it's a lovely place to sit and think. I've very fond memories of sitting in pubs, but I haven't sat in a pub for a long time. I saw a picture last week of a pint of Guinness on a table in an empty bar, and I brought a tear to my eye. Yeah. But yes, but I'm always writing. I say I don't suffer from writer's block. Writer's block. Some people say, oh, I have writer's block. I have a lowering of standards. So I just, I can't write children's poems at the moment because when I write children's poems, I need to have the audience in front of me. You know, I need to have, so I can say it to them and you get their reaction and they tell you immediately what they think of your poem. Very good audience.
You said that you always have a theme.
Mm.
But do you have, now you said that you write haikus, so you also have structures.
Mm.
Sometimes do you have structures that will be instead of a theme?
No, yes, sometimes I do. When I did, that's right, when I did this book, approximately The Key of C, I had all the poems had 100 words.
Wow.
And I didn't start, what happened was when I started to write the poems, I noticed one day on the computer, when I started putting them onto the computer, that they all looked to have around this, and I pressed the button, the word count, and one had 99, 98, 97, and it was freaky. And then I said, well, I'll make a book with all poems of 100 words. And I did that for about a year, but I couldn't keep it up. So now there's poems. So there's the kind of the shadow, the ghost of that scheme is there. And lots of the titles have 100 words about Seamus Heaney, 100 words about Gary Snyder, but they're there. I sometimes write tanka as well as haiku, you know, tanka, 57577. And I do the little books. I do stuff. Yeah. But,
do you sin with sonnets?
do I still do sonnets? I do sonnets.
Yeah.
No, I like sonnets. Yeah. No, I love sonnets. I've never done a whole book of sonnets, but too many poets have, so I leave that to better poets than me. But I like sonnets, and I could sometimes do the picture books. See the picture book when you take a picture, like this picture. And the man sent me this picture one day, and he says, "Would you do haiku for my furniture brochure?" And he sent me these. Just see, and you just write the hush of morning. We couldn't buy this silence. Words break it with joy. I did all these. So,
Leo, do you have any question? And is there a question in the chat that you want to read, Leo?
Let's see, just one moment. Okay, there's one question which you already answered because someone asked if you ever have a writer's block, and then you said you don't. You just have a low and no standards.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a nice answer.
Yeah.
Yes, and there are many great comments on the chat, people that really enjoyed the conversation, but I don't see questions exactly. Right?
Yeah.
Gilad, I'm missing something?
No, it's...
I think
okay.
most of the remarks are just people saying that how much they enjoy seeing you and meeting you and hearing this conversation. So...
When I do at festivals, the big festival, the West of Ireland, Clifton, I do that every year, and I do a lot of the introductions to poets. And at the end of the poet, whether it's big poet, small poet, they say any questions from the audience, and it's always that thing with stunned silence. But I always say to the poet, well, in that case, let's have another poem, and that's what I do.
Good.
But with an audience, you can do that. But with talking to the computer, it's very strange.
Yeah, but actually, we can do that also. If there's a poem you want to read, which is not in the presentation, you can read it, of course. And
because I'm so bad with computers, I'll do a computer poem about me and computers.
Right.
Because what happens is I'll be writing, and my wife is now working from home, but usually she goes to work, and she's always saying to me about the computer after I've written all day, have you backed it up? Another way, have you backed it up? And I don't know how to back up on the computer, right? But I don't want to seem like a fool, so I say, oh yeah, backed it up. And I have memory sticks, the memory sticks things, and I put stuff on memory sticks, but I can never remember where I put the memory stick, so that doesn't work. And so one day, the computer crashed, kaput, and I knew that when my wife come home, she'd say, "Did you back it up?" So I wrote this poem. It's called "Unusually Dusty," like old, and it's about the computer crashing. And I wrote this poem, and I put it on the kitchen table beside the broken computer. And I went to the bar, and when I came back, she had everything. So this is the poem. I better put my glasses on. It's called "Unusually Dusty." And this is for all the people out there who are no good on computers, like me. Unusually dusty. My computer crashed last night. It was as if the house burned down, but no fire brigade arrived, no ambulance. No detectives came to dust for prints. No priest called to tell me he was sorry for my troubles. Just you, standing in the doorway, asking, did you back it up? And I had to say, I hadn't even indicated, hadn't even put it into reverse. Don't say you've lost everything. You can't have lost the new manuscript. Well, not exactly. The dusty scribe who lives inside of me, that flustering old pedant who likes the sound of dust settling, who finds words phrase things unequal to their task. He wrote it all down in his slow, doddery way, word by word with pen and ink. Acoustic, you might say, before it all went electric.
Oh, wow.
Pen and ink.
Great.
Yeah.
This is great. Lovely poem. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So
I think
Sorry with no translation, but
I haven't translated it, but I will do it now because it's lovely.
Yeah, very good.
It's lovely. So, thank you very much. I just see it.
Thank you all.
I want to thank you in the name of the Poetry Place. And this is the concluding event of this fantastic international poetry festival, Zoom festival, the first one maybe in the world, I don't know. And I want to thank you, Tony. I want to thank you, Lyor.
Gilad.
And I want to thank Noah Shakarji, who you can say hello now and unmute yourself so you can see. And Atara Ben Hanan as the producer.
And you were great. I'm sorry. It took me a moment to unmute myself, but you were great in all the comments. It's not that they didn't have what to say. All the comments are very, very just good, and everyone is happy with.
Lovely.
Yeah.
They said they were speechless. This is what they said. Yeah.
I'm sure they were. Yeah. I'm sure they were.
I want to thank also Aviv Peter, who's in charge of the publishing house, and Alon Sarfati doing the PR, and Shirin Magen, who is in charge of our connections with God in the Poetry Place. And yeah, it's a good time to thank God also for making this happen. And
my favorite quote about God is, I'll just be giving my favorite quote about my God. My favorite one is by Samuel Beckett, because he said to Samuel Beckett used to say about himself, "I'm an atheist, thank God," which I really like. That's me.
And in a regular situation, I would say, now drive home safely, but I will change it and I'll say just stay home safely, and have a good evening. And I hope we'll meet again in a physical space, hopefully in Jerusalem, hopefully in Dublin, who knows?
Who knows, yes.
And we send our love to you from us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much. We'll be in touch. Bye.
Lockdown to lockdown, yep.